Welcome to part 2 of our Connect Group series, which is on the deep feelings of Jesus. And this week, we are looking at this occasion where Jesus appears to feel frustrated. He appears to feel frustrated with people who are seeking signs, the sign seekers. And he appears to feel frustrated or perhaps sad or resigned in this passage in Mark chapter 8, because it says he sighed deeply. And it wasn't just a physical sort of sign. It says he sighed deeply in his spirit. Now, just in the paragraph before this, in chapter 7, Jesus also sighs there. It says he sighs there when he looks up to heaven and he heals a deaf man. But in this passage, it's slightly different. It's a different context. And here it says he sighed in his spirit. And a couple of versions say he groaned in his spirit. So if you read the Amplified version, it says he groaned and sighed in his spirit. So what's going on here in this passage where Jesus groans or sighs? And what should we learn about his feelings here? And would we have the same deep feelings as Jesus has in this situation? Well, the background here is that there are huge crowds coming out to follow Jesus very intently, but there's also a huge significant opposition, isn't there? So we've got the politicians and the scribes and the Pharisees and the royalists, Herod's fan base, and they're all out there to get Jesus and plot their devious schemes against him, and they're trying to set him up to fall. And the Pharisees come to Jesus and they want to test him, and they're asking for a sign. They're asking for a sign. And he sighs deeply and he says, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truth is, I say to you that no sign will be given to them." That's what he says. And, it seems strange that people would want to come to Jesus and ask for a sign at this stage in his ministry. You think Jesus would probably feel like saying, come on, guys, haven't you seen what I've been doing? I've been feeding all these people with only, like 7 loaves and a few fish, and even more people before that. And look at this guy who couldn't walk and this girl who was nearly dead, and see what I've done for them to heal them. And that's what, that's what we might feel like saying. Come on. He just says, why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you that no sign will be given to it. And you see, the Pharisees had come to him, and they're looking for a sign from heaven, testing him. The specific sign was that they wanted a sign that they felt would be from heaven, because the miracles that Jesus had been doing have been miracles on earth, obviously. And they wanted to see something spectacular in the sky, maybe like Elijah calling down fire from heaven. And they say, prove it, Jesus, really, with a sign from heaven. Come on. So what would you have felt like in that situation? I think I know what I would have felt like. I think I would have felt, right, you want a sign? I'll show you a sign, because I can. And I'll start moving the sun around in the sky, and then I'll drop a meteorite into the sea, and then that would cause a tsunami coming onto Lou Beach, and then I just put my hand up and I just hold it back there and say like that, there's your sign. Jesus didn't do that, of course. He just sighed deeply in his spirit and like that, and the reason he felt like that was because of the way they were coming up to him. It just showed their unbelief. It was a spiritual feeling that Jesus had. It was a spiritual sigh. And it was a spiritual sigh because their unbelief was deep-rooted. And then we read on in the passage that we see Jesus' strong feelings, not just about those Pharisees, but also feelings about his own followers as well. In verse 14, Jesus and his disciples, they move on, but the disciples have forgotten to bring enough bread, and they start going on about it. And Jesus says to them, be careful. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees. In other words, don't go doing what those sinful Pharisees do in their unbelief. And it seems Jesus could be controlling his pent-up frustration here, because they should know that not having enough bread really shouldn't be an issue by now. Watch out, he says. It seems like you don't trust me now. And they move on. And Jesus says, who do you say I am? He's asked, who do you think they say I am? Who do you say I am? Peter says, you are the Messiah. And Jesus then starts telling them about what must happen to him. He must suffer and die. And Peter in the next second then says, well, come on, Jesus, don't be like that. Don't talk like that. And immediately Jesus rebukes him, says, get away from me, Satan. And that kind of just shows how quickly we can go from fully trusting Jesus 1 second to, oh yeah, I'm not trusting him in the next second. So it's kind of like no wonder Jesus felt like he did. So we can perhaps be justified in feeling frustration and sadness at people when they don't want to trust Jesus. Now, these days, some people can be very outspoken, can't they? Well, they are very outspoken about simply not wanting to believe who God is. And you can be very justified in being sad about this. If those people's hearts are so hardened that they blatantly turn their back on him, you can feel kind of sad and frustrated and dismayed sometimes at that. And those are valid feelings. Some of you may have heard of a guy called Thomas Nagel. He is an American philosopher, and he writes in his book, The Last Word, he writes this: I want atheism to be true, and I'm made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my unbelief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. Now, if you met him and he said that to you, how would you feel? Probably you would have a big spiritual sigh and would be justified, I think. And I'm sure, we can think of examples of people we know who just don't want to believe that Jesus is who he really is, because there is a sinful heart which doesn't want to see Jesus. And they may say they are seeking a sign, but Jesus had strong feelings about that. What they really needed to do was put their trust in him, not just look for more signs. When I was a student, I shared a house with 2 other guys, and they were both Christians, and I was not a Christian. And they would endlessly go on to me about Jesus and the Bible. And I just said, well, if it's true, Phil and Dave, just show me a sign. Make these lights go on and off without you touching any switch or anything. And it wouldn't work. And they got very frustrated with me, and I was refusing to believe at all. And one day Phil said to me, I'm not going to carry on these conversations with you anymore, Paul, but what I am going to do is I'm going to be praying a specific prayer for you. And I'll tell you what that prayer is. That prayer is I'm going to be praying that wherever you go, you will just continually keep meeting Christians. And it did happen. And because of the sequence of situations that I found myself in, I ended up at a Christian teaching course, and it led me to deciding to pray, and I became a Christian. And it's a long story, or a longer story than that, and that testimony, but no time for that here. But my housemates had felt very frustrated with me before all of that. So was their feeling of frustration the same as Jesus' feeling? Now, that's a big question, actually, for this series. We know that our feelings are fickle, don't we? We know that we can be led astray by our feelings, as well as knowing that the Holy Spirit working in our lives can involve our feelings. He brings conviction of sin, and he brings us comfort. So we need to be discerning with our feelings. We often associate feelings with the heart, but the Bible also says that the heart is deceitful above all deceitful above all things, and desperately sick. Who can understand it? So when we have got strong feelings, we need to ask, is this a prompting of the Holy Spirit, or is this something I should say no to? It's not always easy. But when we're frustrated at ourselves, or when we're frustrated at someone else for not putting their trust or our trust in God, like just looking for a sign, then that frustration can be a righteous frustration, because the Bible does instruct us to put our trust in God. So I'm just going to leave you with 3 questions which you might like to use as prompters for your discussion. Now, you don't have to, but here they are. Number 1, how do we feel about people with hardened hearts? Number 2, how do we feel about people who seem to be seeking signs too much? And third one, if you get through those 2 and you still want a third question, how do we feel when 1 second we totally trust Jesus and the next second, for some reason, we don't believe? Hope you have a great discussion. Bye for now.